Good evening. Tennessee law permits, but does not require, state execution of some persons convicted of murder. United States constitutional law, through its Sixth Amendment right to counsel, Eighth Amendment prohibitions against cruel and unusual punishment, and 14th Amendment requirements for due process, restricts and arguably regulates the state's exercise of this extraordinary power. Yet, historic racial disparities in state killings persist, and sometimes state mistake or misconduct convict and condemn innocent persons to face unjust death. These dealings in death, whether criminal or procedural, take a toll on every person involved. They strain and stain the professional, civic, and private communities they touch. They break us. Welcome. My name is Phyllis Hildreth. I am Associate Professor of Conflict Management here at American Baptist College, and we welcome you to multiple conversations that are happening at once. This is, first and foremost, a class for our students here on the Holy Hill, SO 326, Strategies for Civic Transformation. It is also the result of a wonderful partnership between American Baptist College and Tennesseans for Alternative to the Death Penalty in a 6-week series that is entitled, don't I get it wrong, Doomed to Repeat, the Legacy of Race in Tennessee's Death Penalty and Criminal Legal System. Tonight, we will be exploring the third topic in our series, what's the risk of getting it wrong? We have voices from the Innocence Project. We have voices who have been so close to the edge and have been brought back by advocacy and by the struggle to regain some sense and footing of justice. We're so pleased to have those of you in the room with us today. We would also ask you to let your folks know on your social right now that we are live streaming, both on American Baptist College Facebook page and our YouTube, and on our YouTube. I almost got through this, right? So with that, it's my distinct honor to turn this over to my esteemed colleague at TADP, Rafia Muhammad McCormick, who will introduce tonight's panel and lead us through this conversation. Please enjoy. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that introduction, Ms. Hildreth. Queen Phyllis. I call her that because when we approached her wanting to do this project, and man, she just made it happen. She just made it happen. But this is an important night, and I want to thank you all for being here for this very important discussion. As Ms. Phyllis said, that this is surrounding this series that the Death Penalty Information Center did on investigative report on specifically Tennessee that dug into those racist roots. And each part of the series taps into why that is some kind of way connected to race in the death penalty in Tennessee. And so we have some esteemed individuals here who have been deeply impacted. And they're not one of few. Unfortunately, they can be one of many when we look at the possibility that for every one person that is executed, that 8 people were probably innocent. And that's scary. So I am going to introduce this panel. First we have Sabrina Butler-Smith, who is a death row exoneree from Mississippi. She currently resides in Memphis, and she also serves on the Tennesseans for Alternatives to Death Penalty Board. She is active with Witness to Innocence an organization of, by, and for death row exonerees to be effective voices in the fight to end the death penalty and reform the justice system in the U.S. And Sabrina is the first woman that was exonerated from death row. Also, we have with us Joyce Watkins, who spent 27 years in prison for a murder she did not commit, and is the only black woman who has been exonerated here in Tennessee. And with us, we have Jason Gichner. Did I pronounce that correctly?
Yep.
Okay. And he is the Deputy Director and Senior Legal Counsel with Tennessee Innocence Project, and that is the organization that worked with Ms. Watkins. So, panelists, you each have 10 minutes to speak. At the end, I'm going to follow that up with some questions, and then we'll open it up to the floor. How does that sound? Okay, one more other housekeeping thing. People, when they get to talking, we get to sharing our stories, we forget there's a mic. See how I just did that? We get to move in our head. Yeah. Okay, good job.
She already schools.
So, Ms. Joyce, since you're here in Tennessee and you were the first woman, only woman that was exonerated, would you mind sharing your story first?
Yes, I would.
Yes, you would mind, or yes, you were going to?
I'll be glad to share my story. In 2008, I was convicted of murder and rape.
1988.
Oh, 88. I said 1988. In 1988, I was charged with murder and rape of my niece, and my boyfriend was also charged with rape and murder. We were sentenced to 27 years, to life plus 60 years. I lived to get out, but he didn't. I started pursuing my innocence while I was incarcerated, and when I got out, I finished. I didn't give up. Innocent Project in New York was corresponding with me, and something about they didn't have enough funds, so I found the Tennessee Innocent in Nashville. And I walked in and asked them would they help me prove my innocence. And during that time, I was on the sex offender register. I wasn't allowed to be outside of the house from 6 p.m. up until 6 a.m. If kids was in the neighborhood, I wasn't supposed to go out. I was to go in. Certain places I could go, certain places I couldn't go. They would come in and look around all times of day and night. It was just like still being in prison, but outside the prison. So I never gave up on proving my innocence. And during that time in incarceration, my family started trying to get somebody to help me, but they began to pass away. I lost 4 brothers and a sister while incarcerated. When I went, I had 10 aunts and uncles. I came out with 1. I had 3 sisters. I ended up with 2. So most of my family has passed on, nieces, nephews. So it's just a very few of us left. But I'm glad that I could prove my innocence. Maybe I could get out and help someone else to prove their innocence. But I'm so grateful and thankful for the Tennessee Innocence Project in Nashville who helped me to get exonerated and the charges dropped. It's just been a relief. I've got my life back. I know I can't get those years back, but I got my life back. And I constantly, whatever they ask me to do, I do. I have a niece and a goddaughter that stands by me a lot, and 2 sisters. One doesn't get around too good, and the other one doesn't stay too close to me. So I'm just enjoying myself. I'm glad I can enjoy myself. I spend my time walking, visiting, and I got to visit my families in the cemetery took 35 years, but I did, to be able to go to put flowers on my mother and father, my sister's brother's grave. It's been challenging, but since I've gotten exonerated, charges dropped, it's been nice. I try to live my life the best I can. I walk every Sunday. I'm in Sunday school and church. I was brought up like that. I was doing that before I got incarcerated. And I was what you would call a workaholic. I worked a lot. I was buying a house, car, whatever that I thought I wanted, you know. I worked for what I had. And I would work anywhere from 12 to 16 hours a day to get what I want. But my going to prison was racial motivated. I wasn't supposed to be a black young woman living in a 10-room house, driving a nice car, made coats, diamonds, and pearls. It wasn't heard of 35 years ago because I was supposed to have been too young. They looked at me as where I was supposed to have been doing drugs, drinking, or whatever, but I didn't choose that life. I chose the life to have some of the things in life that I wanted to enjoy. I loved my family. I constantly visit my family. It's just been great since I've been out, you know, and I thank God for that. But when I went into the Innocence Project, before I went in, I always would pray for God to put somebody in my life to help me prove my innocence. And once I did that, I just let it alone. And then I said, God, show me what I need to do. And I just went in and asked them, could they help me? And they said, well, sit down and we'll talk about it. And we did. And I got blessed from it. You know, I'm free, you know. And my last words that I said to Jason and the rest of them is, you stuck with me now. I'm not going anywhere. I'm in your life forever, and you in mine forever. So, you know, you accept that. That's just the way it's going to be. And that's the way it's been being, you know. But I am so thankful for the Tennessee Innocent to help me to prove my innocence and to help someone else along the way.
So even though I said I was going to wait till after all the stories to ask a question, would you mind just taking a couple minutes just to kind of just draw the picture for us of how you even found yourself in this situation?
By trying to do the right thing. My niece was sick, and another family member had her, and they wouldn't take her to the doctor, and I did. And she lived a few days, and they tried to say she was raped, she was murdered, but none of that happened. So she passed away, and it was that I let him rape her to hold on to him, but none of that was true. So we got convicted, and we both lost everything we had, and it was just a devastating moment in our life. It was like, we gone, we won't ever be back with our families again, but I never gave up. I never gave up. It was just a devastating situation that I lived through.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I couldn't even imagine being in that space of thinking that you're going to get your baby and take her to the hospital to be taken care of and then be charged with a crime.
Yes.
And so that story is almost eerily similar to yours somewhat. Oh, I was supposed to go to Jason next. Oh, we were doing. Well, we were going to actually do Jason last so he can kind of get into talk about what the Innocence Project does from that side and get the stories from both of you guys first. Okay.
I'm the least important person on stage, so I'll go last.
Okay. So, yeah, can you walk us through your story? And I'm going to try not to cry. I don't heard your story a couple times, and I cry every time. So, everybody say a prayer for me.
Oh, wow. Oh, wow. Well, I didn't do as much time as she did. I didn't do as much time as she did. I did 6.5 years, actually. My name is Sabrina Butler-Smith. I'm the first woman to be exonerated in the United States from death row out of Mississippi. I was 17 years old when my case happened. My son had heart, kidney, and lung problems. But before I found that out, this night, I've been on my own since I was 14 years old. Me and my mother were estranged. And I lived in an apartment complex where I did not know many people over there at all. I didn't have a car, didn't have a phone at that time, and we're talking about in 1998, 89, I'm sorry. I decided to go jogging one night, and I put my son to sleep, and I left him in the house. That was the mistake that I made. I jogged up to the end of the street. When I jogged up to the end of the street, I lived in a dead-end street, on a dead-end street. You could see the apartments from the end. When I got to the end of the street, I turned around and I went back. And I kind of knew when my son would wake up. So I went in the kitchen first, and I got a bottle. When I got a bottle, I went in his room. When I went in his room, I noticed that he was not the way I turned him, but he wasn't breathing. So I panicked. I didn't know what to do. So I ran outside, and it was like 11, 12 o'clock at night. When I got outside, I was screaming to the top of my lungs, trying to get somebody, anybody over there in those apartments to help me, because I didn't know anybody. A lady, first lady next door to me, she came. She told me that she couldn't take me to the hospital. Her kids was in the bed. So she closed the door in my face. She didn't help me with my son at all. So I ran downstairs, and I got this other lady from the end apartment. She called me by name, which I didn't know. That was unusual, now that I think about it. But she called me by name, and she took my son, and she took him in the apartment, and she put him on the floor, and she started CPR. I went out to get somebody to help me, and I finally found this couple who was willing to take me. And I ran back in the apartment, and when I got in there, she told me to hold his nose, press in his stomach, and blow in his mouth. She told me the wrong way, because I applied adult CPR to my son all the way to the hospital. When I got to the hospital, though, and they took him from me, first thing went through my mind was that, man, you are in a lot of trouble. Because, that's what kids think. That's what I thought. You reach in the cookie jar, you get a cookie. This is more devastating than that, but I'm just trying to give an example of how it felt at that time, thinking that I'm in trouble. And I thought, I'm going to jail for leaving my son at the house. But never in a million years did I thought that these people was going to charge me with murder. So I said to myself, you can't be honest. You got to lie. You can't tell the truth. So when they started asking me questions, I just made up stuff. I just came up with anything that I thought, because I wanted it to be over. I didn't know what to do. They told me they couldn't save him, and I just thought they were lying to me. That's the first thing kept coming in my mind. I was just saying they lying. This is not happening. So they told me to go to the police station. I got to the police station that night when it happened, and I still didn't tell the truth. So they sent me home. They told me to go home. I went home, and I couldn't sleep. I didn't have my son with me. I didn't know what happened. I didn't know what was wrong. I was just ready to get back to the hospital because I wanted to know what happened. So I got up the next morning. I found a way back to the hospital. When I got there, the detectives were there, and they said, we want to take you back down to the police station for more questioning. So they put me in the police car, and the first thing the police said was, boy, you in so much trouble, because if you wasn't in so much trouble, me and you could do some things. That kind of blew over my head because I really, I was gone at this point. I didn't really know, what to expect because I'd never been in trouble before. I didn't know. So when we got to the police station, before I could get in the room, the interrogation room, and sit down, they started yelling and screaming, and this interrogation was over 4 hours. They kept telling me I beat my baby, I stomped him, I did this. They came with all kind of stuff, and I kept telling them that's not true. I didn't kill my child. They don't want to hear any of that. The lead detective, he wrote the statement out, and he pushed it in my face, and he said, sign it. And the only thing that I thought to do was to sign at the very bottom of the page. Because I said to myself, maybe somebody, anybody will see this. And that's what I did. And it did help me in my trial. And so I signed it. They charged me with capital murder. But they charged me with a child abuse charge that wasn't even on the books yet. It wasn't on the books till 23 days after I was already incarcerated. Now, how you do that, I don't know. Sat in the county jail for a whole year before I went to trial. Saw my attorneys 2 days before trial. One was a divorce attorney, and the other one was the lead chair. They just didn't do the investigative work. All my son's problems, any medical records that they had was at the hospital the whole time. The district attorney, he took the jury to a picnic while they were supposed to be sequestered. He talked to all the doctors and nurses in one room. They already knew what they were going to do before they saw me. I had an all-white jury. So when I saw the jury, I knew then that my life was over because nobody looked like me, nobody. And I'm sitting here trying to ask the attorneys, please, let me tell them what happened. But they didn't want to do that. He put me up there in the second phase. The jury already know you're going to get up and plead for your life. So that didn't make sense. He was drunk during the whole trial. He was popping candy in his mouth, talking about, no, we got this thing nipped in the bud. So when I made it to death row, I was 19 years old. They sentenced me March the 13th of 1990. My death date was July the 2nd of 1990. That was one of the worst things that I wouldn't wish on anybody. Because they did not tell me that the state had to exhaust all state remedies before they could actually carry out a death sentence. So July the 2nd, I paced the floors. I listened for every chain, every sound, because I actually thought that was the day that I was going to die. Nobody said anything. And how I made it through, because it was another lady on death row with me at the time that kept saying, Sabrina can't do anything because you haven't been back to court yet. And that's one of the worst things that you can do to an individual, and especially if they're innocent, to put them in a place such as that and not explain to them their case, not meet them where they are, not tell them anything. I didn't have any of that knowledge, none at all, until I met my husband. He's sitting in the audience, Jarvis. He wrote me and he said, look, they can't do this. This is not right. He said, I will help you find somebody to work on this case. And I got Clive Stafford Smith, who was out of England, to come in to do my case, because at the time, Mississippi was being looked at for racial profiling on African American people. And so they came in and they wanted to look at a lot of death penalty cases at that time. So they came in, they found out my son had heart, kidney, and lung problems. It was never a murder at all. Not a murder at all. Today, I have a 20-year-old daughter that has the same disease my son had. And the only reason I think it's better is because of technology. Back then, they didn't have the technology for what he has, and it's polycystic kidney disease, and that's what she has. And I tell my story as often as I can. I go around to wherever, anybody that will listen, because I know that if it can happen to me, it can happen to anybody. That's not right. That's not right. How can you take somebody and expect them, you do that to them, and then you push them back out there in the public and you say, oh, go on about your life, I did that, you'll be all right. There's no way. The trauma never ends. That will never end for us, never. And then we're innocent. What do you do? What do you say to me? I've never got an apology from anybody. And so I'm going to keep on speaking until I can't no more. That's my job. That's why I'm here.
Thank you for sharing that, Sabrina, because I know that's heavy. And I know now why every single time you tell that story, I cry, because I had a brother who had a child that died of SIDS and went through the interrogation and thankfully was not charged. But I always think that what if that had happened to him?
They just wanted to make a name for themselves in their town, and they chose me to do that.
It's so scary. So, Jason, you're doing some powerful work out there, saving lives.
So I'm lucky enough that I know both of these incredible women, and so I think it's okay for me to say this. This is the second time in 1 month I've had to speak directly after Sabrina, and that's just not cool.
I tried to put you in front.
I know you did. I appreciate it. You didn't the last time we did this. I'm just grateful to be here, to be on this stage with these women, and happy to tell you a little bit about what we do at the Tennessee Innocence Project. Happy to talk to you about wrongful convictions. I talk about these a lot, how they happen, why they happen, how big of a problem it is. The Tennessee Innocence Project is a nonprofit law firm. We represent innocent people all over the state of Tennessee, convicted of crimes they did not commit. We have exonerated 5 people in the last 2 years of murder cases that they were innocent of, that they did not commit. Collectively, the folks that we have gotten out of prison have served 136 years for crimes that they did not commit. There are, one of the first questions people ask me a lot is, well, how big of a problem is this? How often does the system get it wrong? Is this just a fluke thing that happens once in a blue moon and we don't need to be all that concerned about it? And I think the fundamental premise that people get wrong all the time about wrongful convictions is that you can have a very small percentage of the prison population that is innocent and wrongfully convicted. But when you start talking about the numbers of people who are in prison, it turns out to be an enormous problem that we're not doing enough about. So let's just say for a minute that the system is getting it right 97% of the time. And when I say getting it right, what I mean by that is convicting people of the crime that they're actually guilty of. Put aside for a moment whether I think the system should be prosecuting people for some of these crimes. That's a different question for a different day, okay? But let's just say that the folks that are getting prosecuted for the crime that the state is alleging that they have done wrong, 97% of the time, we're getting it right in Tennessee, okay? So 3% of the time, we're getting it wrong. You know, most people would say that if a system is getting something right 97% of the time, particularly a system that's run by human beings, well, it's actually working pretty well. That's doing what it's supposed to do. It's functioning the way that we would like it to function. That's all fine and good, except for the fact that at any given time in the state of Tennessee, there are about 30,000 people locked up convicted of crimes. So if the system's getting it right 97% of the time, but wrong 3% of the time, that means as we are all sitting here tonight, there are 900 innocent people locked up for a crime that they didn't commit. So the main point that I would make about that I try to tell people all the time, is that that's fine. You can believe that the system is working, that it's successful, that it's doing what it's supposed to do. Even if all of that is true, we still have an enormous wrongful conviction problem on our hand that we're not doing enough about. And frankly, we're not thinking enough about, because people are moved when they hear these stories, but they think this is 1 in a million, and it's not. It's happening way more than people realize it's happening. And sadly, the people who get exonerated, the stories that we hear about, are folks that have been convicted of murder, that are serving life sentences, because they have the time to put in to get exonerated, because on average it takes about 11 to 13 years to get somebody exonerated. When you've been convicted, it's really hard to unring that bell. The system prefers finality. The system prefers to believe we got it right, okay? It's very difficult to get back into a courtroom, let alone change the outcome of the case. So the system is built in a way that once this happens, it's incredibly difficult to untangle, and it takes years and years and years. And one of the misconceptions that people have about wrongful convictions is, there's this talking point. Well, this case has been going on for 20 years. This person's been to court 15 times. How many times do they need to be found guilty before we say this is over with? The problem with that question is that it assumes that the courts have been hearing the right evidence for 15, 20 years, when they haven't been. Practically, the way that this plays out, the way that this played out in Joyce's case, is that the evidence of her innocence, which at the end of the day in Joyce's case was a medical case, right? I mean, we can talk about the facts of her case, but this was not a squishy situation where we were asking people to use their best judgment. It was medically impossible that she committed this crime. And when we went back to court, we had the medical evidence to prove that. But the problem is that when she went to trial in 1988, the only thing that the jury heard was the medical examiner who gave an incorrect opinion about what happened in the case, who later lost their license and wasn't allowed to practice medicine in Tennessee anymore. But all the jury heard was the bad junk evidence, the garbage science. They didn't actually hear the truth. So then what happens when you get convicted? You go up on appeal, right? When you go up on appeal, you don't get a do-over. This isn't a chance that you get to bring in new witnesses and present the evidence that nobody ever heard before. This is an opportunity for an appellate court to review what happened at your trial and determine whether the judge and the lawyers did things properly at the trial. So if nobody heard the evidence of innocence at your trial, nobody hears it on your direct appeal. So you then go through years, you have multiple court dates, and still nobody's heard the truth. Then you get through your direct appeal, and you go through another phase of court dates where you have something called post-conviction. And in post-conviction, you get the opportunity to put on proof of constitutional errors, which means your lawyer at that stage in the game, 5, 6, 7 years in, can come in with the evidence of innocence that a jury has never heard and say, look, the lawyer at trial was ineffective because they didn't present this evidence of innocence. And had they presented it, the outcome would have been different. On paper, this sounds great, right? This is your chance to get back into court and right the wrong that has happened. Unfortunately, on paper, doesn't take into account how we fund indigent defense in the state of Tennessee. And 99% of people on post-conviction have appointed counsel. And we cap what we pay appointed counsel in Tennessee, $2,000 to handle these cases. That's for their legal fees, their experts, their investigators. I can tell you, I don't know, we put maybe 400 or 500 hours into Joyce's case. So you ask a lawyer to do that work and you pay them $2,000 to do it, and one of two things happens. Really good lawyers work for free, but way more often than that, people don't do the work. So then the evidence of innocence still is never presented to the court. And then you go through the wash cycle again on all the appeals about the post-conviction, and still nobody's hearing the evidence of innocence. So when Joyce spent 27 years in prison, but it took us almost 35 years to get her case back into court for the truth to be heard. And when we went back into court for her case, we had the chief medical examiner for the state of Tennessee, the top forensic pathologist in the state, to say it was medically impossible that she committed this crime. We had a pediatric neurologist from Vanderbilt Children's Hospital to say it was medically impossible that she committed this crime. We had the withheld evidence that the state never turned over that we didn't get until 2021 when we did a Public Records Act request, right? So we had this perfect storm of things that had gone wrong, both in terms of bad actors withholding evidence, lies that were told to the jury, and junk science. And it wasn't until 35 years later that anybody heard this all for the first time. So that's the problem with these cases, is that if it doesn't go right on the front end, if the evidence isn't heard at your first trial, it can take you 15 years, it can take you 20 years, it can take you 30 years to get back into court and prove your innocence. And we've only been around since 2019, right? And we're the only statewide organization that's representing folks in this circumstance, unless you can get a lawyer to do it for free or you can pay somebody to do it. And I can assure you that when you've been in prison for 30 years for something you haven't done, you don't have money to hire a lawyer to go out and spend 500 hours and work on your case. And the last thing I'll say is that while we're, in my opinion, doing a really good job now of finding and litigating wrongful convictions because we got boots on the ground doing this work, we've got 6 lawyers across the state doing these cases now. Up until 2019, Tennessee didn't have people doing this work across the state full time. And what I can tell you is that I told you a minute ago that in the last 2 years, we've exonerated 5 innocent people convicted of murder in Tennessee. In the 30 years before that, 11 people were exonerated, right? And that's not because all of a sudden we figured out how to lawyer in Tennessee. It's because nobody was doing the work, right? And I can guarantee you, and it's true in every other state where you look, where there's lawyers on the ground handling these kind of cases, if you've got boots on the ground, you will find these cases, you will find where these things went wrong, and you will see exoneration shoot up. And I promise you, that is continue to be what's going to happen in Tennessee over the next how many years we're around doing it.
Okay, so let me get this straight. I'm on death row. I don't manage to find somebody such as the Innocent Project to hear my case. Then what's going to happen to me?
So it's a little bit trickier when you're on death row, because if you're on death row in Tennessee, you're going to have counsel. So you're going to have an attorney. Initially, you're going to have the post-conviction defender's office. Eventually, you're going to have the capital habeas unit at the federal defender's office. And they're all great lawyers. But everything is different when you're talking about litigating innocence cases on death row. And the reason I say that is because it's not just about the law anymore. It's also about the politics, right? And the politics of capital cases is just so politically charged. And people will get so dug in on the politics side of it. And when I said earlier that, the state doesn't want to say that it got things wrong, it really doesn't want to say it got things wrong when you're talking about somebody getting the death penalty. So, we were earlier today, we were with my friend Ndume, who was here last week. And what Ndume's lawyer would tell you is that he didn't initially get exonerated. His case was he got relief where he was moved from death row into just a regular conviction, serving a life sentence, and he was exonerated after that. And what they would tell you is that moving the case from death row to just a regular conviction took a lot of the politics out of it and made the exoneration more possible in the long run.
Wow, that's scary. Wow, that is scary. And I think I need to correct, because I think I did the ratio wrong. Is for every 8 people that are executed, one person is innocent, or is it vice versa?
So I don't know what that percentage is. I can tell you some other percentages that I know about innocence when it comes to particularly race. So, and none of this is going to surprise anybody, right? I mean, these are the same problems that exist throughout the criminal legal system. Unsurprisingly, they exist in the innocent space too, right? So, an innocent black person is 7 times more likely to be convicted of murder than an innocent white person. An innocent black person is 12 times more likely than an innocent white person to be convicted of a drug offense, right? It takes years longer for a black person than a white person to get exonerated. Again, none of these numbers are surprising. Of all of the exonerations that have happened in the last 30 years that we've been tracking, more than 50% of them, involve people of color. Whereas, the general population is somewhere like 12 or 13%, right? So again, these problems aren't unique to the innocence space, right? These are problems that permeate the entire system, and they exist in this place too.
Thanks for clarifying that. Sabrina, how do you think that your race impacted what happened to you?
I know it impacted a lot. I'm trying to guard my words, but I'm trying to guard my words. I know. I'm trying to guard my words, but it impacted a lot because of the town where I lived. Columbus is a very small town, and they still have the Confederate soldier at the courthouse, and they still have the post office where the guys sitting on the horse and the black people are in the cotton picking cotton and all of that. So I knew that once I saw the jury and how the makeup of my first jury was, I already knew. Because, I didn't really know them, and they didn't know me, I guess, and it impacted me a lot. It impacted me a lot. Just, it impacted me a lot.
Yeah.
It's hard to think about, because I don't understand why we as black people are, hated like that. I don't understand that part. To, be one race of people, it's a lot of us. It's a lot of races. So, why is it so difficult? And what hurts me the most is that when you go through being incarcerated like we were, you get out and you think that you're going to be able to integrate back into a system that is going to accept you for you knowing you proved your case and you're innocent, that it's going to work out for you. That's not happening. I walked around from 1995 to 2009 without a job. Nobody would hire me, even though I was exonerated. I'm 53 years old today and still have problems with finding jobs. Never was given housing, never was given any mental, nothing, no medical anything. So what do you do when you do this to people and you expect them to integrate back into society, like as a whole, what do? And so, yeah, race plays a huge role in these cases, or in my case.
Thank you. Joyce, so the whole case against you was hinged on a discredited medical report. First question I ask is that, how did you get released after 27 years?
I went up for parole 3 or 4 times, and my niece, mother, and my sisters would come to the parole board, and the last time, it really almost got out of hand because they were saying, she don't know what happened. They don't know what happened. Why are you still holding her? And it just escalated till they just said, she's paroled. But usually you don't make parole unless you admit that you did it. If you don't say you did it, you don't come out of there. But the mother was so persistent to the parole board that I didn't know what happened. And it was still, even with the parole board, it was still racially motivated by the way they talked. But she's got that voice. She's, I guess, from being in the service. She just wasn't going to let them have the last word.
So more than likely what would have happened in your case is that if you hadn't got parole, you would still be in there.
I would still be in there if she hadn't acted the last 2 times the way that she did, because she threatened to go to the news peoples and everybody else she could think of, and it was just, she's paroled like that. She's paroled. They don't like for you to threaten them. I don't guess they would have wanted that to hit the news, and somebody else would have went and found out the real truth of what happened. So they just let me make parole. But they had me under strict rules that I shouldn't have been in, that didn't even exist. But I still did those. I abided by the rules until I could get something done.
And it still took you another 8 years after your release
Yes.
to prove your
Yes.
innocence.
But I want to say when Jason and them took my case, I wasn't supposed to leave Franklin County unless I let my parole officer know it. But I had so much faith in, if I go, nobody know. And that's what I did. And I don't know today, and I often try to figure out how did I get the address to go to them, and I called my niece, and I almost got snowed up there in Nashville, and found it, and I went and filled out an application, and after I didn't hear, they moved, and I went there, they moved again, so I just found it and walked in and asked them, would they please help me prove my innocence? And when I told them what happened, they immediately knew that this was a racial motivated case because I had no records. No speeding tickets, no nothing.
Wow. Whew. Man.
And it was based on a lot of where I lived. The only black in that whole neighborhood in a 10-room house. I'm buying a 10-room house, driving a Cadillac every day, but they didn't understand that I was working 12 to 16 hours a day to get that.
Wow. Whew. Jason, what do you think are the biggest, what would you say are the biggest contributing factors to wrongful conviction? And are there racial disparities related to those reasons? And and for those contributing factors, what is being done to prevent that from happening in future cases?
How much time you got?
Whoa.
I mean, there are a lot of things that lead to wrongful convictions, but fundamentally, in my opinion, the biggest thing that leads to wrongful convictions is the way that we pay to defend people charged with crimes. And, you know, every single person that we've gotten exonerated, the amount of time and resources that we've had to put into those cases, it's just literally impossible for somebody to have done that kind of work on the front end if they were appointed to represent somebody. The system is not built in a way that innocent people can put up the type of defense that they need to put up to defend themselves. And there's not always a huge motivation to do something about it, right? Because the response is, well, we're getting it right 97% of the time, right? So do we really need to upend everything if we're getting it right the vast majority of the time? So that's the biggest thing that we can do, right? I mean, we can totally rethink the way that we fund indigent defense. And if we gave people the resources and, frankly, the attorneys to represent them on the front end, there would be a lot less wrongful convictions. The other thing that we can do that we've gotten better at, but we could get better at still, is we could be much more transparent with this whole process, right? Thanks. You know, there are still places where people are interrogated and the interrogations aren't videotaped or audio taped. You know, I have a client that was exonerated earlier this year out of Pulaski, Tennessee, right? A black guy convicted in front of an all-white jury in Pulaski, Tennessee, right? The place where the Klan was founded. And he confessed to a crime after the police threatened him, which they later admitted, during an interrogation that wasn't videotaped or audio taped, where they typed up his statement and had him sign, and he has an IQ of 69, right? And this is how we've been doing business for a long time, and in some places how we are still doing business. You know, I don't understand that. You know, if the objective is to get it right, then videotape it. Everybody knows what happened. We can all see it for ourselves, right? Why is there certain information that I'm entitled to get through a public records request on the back end after somebody is convicted, but isn't turned over to the people defending the case on the front end? Again, what are we hiding, right? Why is the police file something that's not turned over? Why shouldn't the defense have the entire investigative file? The object isn't to put people in jail. The object is to get it right. And when we hide stuff, we don't get it right. Why is it okay to lie to kids when we're interrogating them, right? I mean, the proof is in the exonerations. When you lie to kids during interrogations, you get bad confessions. That's just what happens. It's true. Now, you're going to get some good confessions, but good luck trying to figure out which ones are good or bad when you're lying to a kid during an interrogation. But we still do this stuff. That's still legal. That, you know, there are juveniles charged with murder that are lied to during their interrogations all the time. We had somebody exonerated a few years ago on a DNA case where the police told him during his interrogation, you better plead guilty because your DNA was found on the victim. So he pled guilty. It wasn't. It was somebody else's DNA. And then he was exonerated, and the actual person who did it is being prosecuted now. Meanwhile, the guy served 11 years in prison before that happened. So
Wow.
there's a list of things that we can do better.
I
Man,
want to piggyback off what he said too, as far as the.
with the
Oh,
microphone.
yeah. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm not, okay, because I thought my voice carried enough. You know, but anyway, I see the guy over there in the
Yes,
you know, but
our streamer can tell you it
okay.
does not.
But anyway, about the police lying to you as a kid, because when I was first interrogated, I thought the right to remain silent meant be quiet until spoken to. I had never had any legal training. How am I supposed to know, you know, at 17 what to say or what not to say? And I'm interrogated by these big guys, and I'm the only little person in there, and they're screaming and hollering and talking to me or whatever. So I actually thought it meant be quiet until spoken to. And then my attorney, they only got $15 for my $1,500 for my death penalty case. And one of the attorneys, like I told you, he was a death penalty. I mean, he was a divorce attorney. So
Wow.
yeah, that's the way it was then. I mean, and they did not record. They didn't videotape my confession. None of that. They didn't do any of that. So I know what he was saying on that.
Legal lynching. All right. You already mentioned that you didn't receive any apologies. You didn't receive any reparations. And you both were taken into custody for the loss of a loved one. You a child, your own child, and you your niece, almost immediately after this child had passed away.
Correct.
What was the grief process? I asked this as a mother who's lost a child and being free to be able to grieve. How do you grieve the loss of your child on the inside?
That was hard for me because my son's name is Little Walter. He was born July the 4th, 1988. And it's really hard for me because when I got out in 2014, I found out that his death certificate still stated that he was murdered by his mother. So I had to fight Mississippi once again. The bad part about it was I found out 2 years later where he was buried. He was buried in the woods. They buried him in the woods on a dirt road under a tree on a hill. I tried to get him exhumed. Can't do that because they did not bury him in a metal container. They buried him in a box. So I can't get in the place where he lays because the earth has taken everything back. So yes, that's very hard for me. And then watching my 20-year-old now fight for her life the same way that I lost my son, and I think it would just devastate me very much if something was to happen to her. Because this is a devastating disease as far as I'm concerned. And to have my life taken from me for the loss of my child is hard. It's hard, baby. It's hard. But I'm going to keep on fighting. I don't give a crap what. Because I know that this is wrong. This is wrong. And you shouldn't do this to your people.
Okay, with that, I'm going to open it up to the floor for any questions. How much time do we have?
About 2 minutes.
Okay, so we can get about 2 or 3 questions from the floor. If anybody wants to, you can just walk up to the middle to that mic and you can ask your question.
First, I just wanted to say, Miss Joyce, I was struck by the fact that you said that they held it against you because you had a 10-room house in a nice neighborhood, and if you'd been a poor black woman, they would have held that against you too. So it's just devastating. But my question is, you mentioned that you didn't receive any reparations, and I seem to remember that Ndume had to agree that he wouldn't come back to the state for any money if he got exonerated. Do people ever get reparation? Could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. It's incredibly difficult in Tennessee to get compensation after you've been wrongfully convicted. You hear cases of people getting $25, $30, $40 million, because they served time in prison for something they didn't do. That's not in Tennessee. That's not happening here. There are 2 ways that you can try and get compensation after you've been exonerated in Tennessee. The first is that you can file a civil lawsuit. Those are very difficult to file. I know of 1 person in the last 10 years who has successfully done that. Not that there's a huge army of people that have that available to them, but it's very difficult. Those are hard cases to bring. The other way that you can do it is that you can file with the Board of Claims in Tennessee for a fund that is capped at $1 million if you've been wrongfully convicted. But the problem with the law is that it's not good enough that you've been judicially exonerated. You need a certificate of exoneration from the governor. So Joyce was exonerated a year and a half ago, and that application has been sitting with the governor since then, trying to get a certificate of exoneration that she can't file with the Board of Claims for until that happens. So I can tell you, I know just about everybody in Tennessee who has been exonerated, and I only know 2 of all of the people I know in Tennessee who have been exonerated, who have gotten any money. One got $1 million, one got 1.2. And, you know, that's also sort of ridiculous, right, for what's taken from you. But even getting that is incredibly difficult in Tennessee.
Are there any other questions?
I'm Bill Northrop, and I have been visiting a man on death row for about 4 years now. And I wondered how somebody gets selected by the Innocence Project to be represented by that program.
So there's basically 3 ways that people get in touch with us, typically. Sometimes they'll reach out to us directly from prison themselves. Sometimes their family will reach out. Sometimes their prior attorney will reach out and say, you know, this is a case that never really sat well with me. Joyce was the rare walk-in. We don't get a lot of walk-ins. But initially, if somebody reaches out to us, first of all, our information's in every prison in the state. So you can write to us and say, can you send me an application? And then when you send the initial application, there are some threshold sort of things you need to pass before we go further. We only do actual innocence cases, right? So we don't do what I would call manifest injustice cases. Somebody got 200 years, they should have got 5. Somebody was illegally pulled over and there were drugs in the car. We don't do those cases. Not that those people shouldn't have good lawyers, we just don't have the resources to do those and the innocence cases. Once you pass that initial screening, there's a second application where we get more detailed information from you. At that point, if the case still looks like it's promising, and we take everybody at their word at this stage in the game. So if you reach out and say, I'm innocent, I didn't do it, you're gonna pass phase 1. What we do at that point is that we get the appellate record and we read all of the appellate opinions, then we pull the trial transcript and we read the trial transcript and the post-conviction transcript. If we get through all of that material and we still think the case looks promising, we start doing public records requests. We get the DA file, we get the police file, we get jail records, we get school records. If we do that, then we meet with the person, and if we still have faith in the case, we start going out and hiring experts and re-interviewing witnesses and reworking up the case. It takes us on average 6 to 9 months to work a case up before we agree to take somebody on as a client. We are big believers that our credibility is everything that we have. When we walk into a courtroom, I want the judge to think, oh crap, these guys are here, this person must be innocent. That only works if we're right every time. So we spend an enormous amount of time working cases up before we take people on as clients. At the end of the day, we say there's 2 things we're looking for. We need to believe you're innocent, and we need to have the goods to prove it. If we can do that, then we take folks on.
With another question about Ndume, I remember hearing at the time that he was released that he had been exonerated for 7 years before he was finally released.
So his case is a little bit complicated. So he had a hearing where they were asking the court to overturn the conviction. And I think this is probably the hearing you're referring to. They did not overturn the conviction, but they took him off death row and converted his case from a death case to a life case. It took about 7 years from there to get back into court, where eventually his conviction was overturned and he was given a new trial. And then at that point what happened, because he was in Memphis, and I'm not going to say what else I think, but he was put in this terrible position where they said to him, you can enter a guilty plea to a lesser charge and take time served and get out basically on a best interest plea, or we're going to retry you. And he took the best interest plea and got out.
And since you brought Memphis into this, just for context, Memphis, 50% of the individuals on Tennessee death row are all from Memphis, Shelby County.
Memphis also transfers more kids from juvenile court to adult court than every other county in the state of Tennessee combined.
So you're probably wondering if there's some things that you can do. Number one, when you have an opportunity, use those keywords DPIC, Death Penalty Information Center, and look at the investigative report that they did on the Tennessee in the racist roost. And I encourage you to read it, even though it's an investigative report, because somebody actually had to investigate and do research. Those are actual stories. They provide actual news stories of so many counties here in Tennessee where these types of lynchings occurred, attacks on cities, and just horrific racial incidents that in Tennessee that you're probably not aware of. Second, if you are not on the mailing list, well, even if you are already on Tennessee's, on our mailing list for TADP, please sign the sheet in the front. But when you get on that mailing list, not only do you get information like signing a petition to not restart executions here in Tennessee, you also get information on how you can stop an execution when it's scheduled, but not just here in Tennessee, all over the country. And then some of you may be able to attest, some good news just happened out of Texas, where we were able to get a stay of execution for Will Spears yesterday? Yesterday. And that comes from those individuals like you who follow TADP and sign those petitions. So, anything you want to end with?
Thank you. First thing I want to do is ask you to give this panel a round of watch me stand over here. Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing your story. Thank you for sharing the process. I mean, I need you to come back to talk to the class. There is so much meat there. And while we're doing the thank yous, please thank Rafia for her tremendous work today, because she's an 11th hour pinch hitter. Stacy Rector was not able to be with us today. She is tending to people. You know, we're all bivocational, and first and foremost, she is a pastor, and so we just ask you to extend your good thoughts and prayers for her and those that she is tending to today. And honey, you stepped in there and did that thing, so thank you. We know it costs a lot.
Well, you know, we are in the chapel, and God, you know,
Provides rams and bushes and all kinds of things. I do want to say this because I talked about process. I was just listening, then I had to get my pad out. Mentioned this previously, but as a recovering public defender and also a juvenile court public defender who cut her eye teeth in the state of Maryland that abolished the death penalty by statute in 2013, there's so many layers of understanding and recognizing, and still with the legal process. Okay, for a moment, got to do a metaphor here. You ever been on the highway and you missed your exit, and you can see that road going along, and you want to go to that store over there, but you can't because you missed the exit? The 3 steps that Jason talked about: what you can and cannot do at trial, then what you can and cannot do at the appellate level, then what you can and cannot do in post-conviction. That's that 6th Amendment we mentioned in the preamble. It's like seeing the road, right? You can see innocence, you can see new evidence, you can see mistake, you can see misdoing, but if you're on this road and the trial's already passed and all you have is appellate, you don't get to go back and do new evidence. If you've exhausted your appeals and all you have left is ineffective assistance of counsel post-conviction, there's even less that you can talk about, that you can bring in. And think about the clock that is ticking and rolling as the lives are draining out of the people who are sitting in the cages, of the people who are outside waiting for them to come back and they don't make it that far, of the money that runs out for the lawyers. $2,000? You said 500 hours for a case? Okay, so $300 an hour billable right now. So what is that? $150,000 worth of legal fees. If you were kind of paying some market rate in some places, $2,000. What would you do for that? And then what we don't even want to raise, because I would love to hear your thoughts on this in another time, to ask, we're talking about racial disparities in the system. What's happening about the racial disparities of those who are trying to address this system? According to recent American Bar Association studies, fewer than 5% of practicing lawyers in this country are African American, even though we're about 11%. And that statistic has been true for about the last century. If we look at the percentage of persons who can stay in the game of indigent defense and public civil law, or to volunteer, what other disparities and differentials come in? Because who can afford to do that? When you're first generation, when you have parents to take care of, when your family is living these stories that you're fighting against. There's so much here. There's so much here. Please, the last action step, you asked about other action steps. For my students, you know who you are. I'm not going to look at anybody. When you read a text, reading it once is not enough. I see a professor in class, right? You have to read several times. You have been provided with living text here. These presentations are archived. Study them, reread them. For those of you who aren't in class and don't have to take the test, we're still all a part of a learning community. Watch these with your communities of care and concern and advocacy. Freeze it, run it back. Play the one with Ndumi last week and tie it into this week. Look at the themes that come through. And then get in where you fit in. What can you do? Every single voice on here is powerful and working in a different way, and so is yours. Thank you so much for joining us. Please come back or dial in next week when we are proud to present Dr. Jamar Tisby, author of The Color of Compromise and a new book. He's going to shoot me. Don't remember the name of it. We'll have it on the website. But he's going to come and talk about what these disparities, the politicization, also the way that comes out in our religious lenses on how we look at these issues. Friday, November 3rd, 6 o'clock. Thank you so much. Take care. Thank you.